Okay, so picture this. There's this 80-ton stone just sitting out in the open. It was moved thousands of years ago without cranes, without engines, without any of the tech we depend on today. So how on earth did they do it? This one single object asks a question that still baffles modern engineers, and that's exactly what we're going to dive into. So yeah, that's the big question, right? How did they pull this off? How did an ancient civilization with basically just their hands and their wits move something so ridiculously massive? It seriously makes you question everything you thought you knew about the past. And here's where it gets really wild, the technology gap. Think about it. On one hand, you've got the ancient world. No power grid, no steel, no engines, nothing. On the other hand, you have us. Moving 80 tons today means bringing in billion-dollar machines, running complex computer models. It's a massive operation. The gap between then and now, it's just mind-boggling. And I really want this number to sink in for a second. 80 tons, that's about 160,000 pounds. To put that in perspective, that's like 40 cars stacked on top of each other. It's almost impossible to even wrap your head around that kind of weight. And that was the challenge they were facing. You know, this isn't just some dusty old history puzzle. This stone forces us to ask a really uncomfortable, almost dangerous question. If we got this so wrong, what else are we totally underestimating about them, about their intelligence? Okay, so let's tackle the first and most obvious answer, what I like to call the brute force myth. For decades, the standard answer from historians was, well, pretty simple. The thinking went, hey, just get enough people, a ton of ropes, and throw some logs underneath to roll it on. And boom, you can move anything. Sounds logical, right? Well, yeah, it sounds logical until you actually look at the evidence. Then the whole theory just completely crumbles. First off, the math for how many people you'd need, it just didn't work. But more importantly, the physical evidence wasn't there. I mean, come on, you drag something that heavy, you're gonna leave a massive scar on the landscape. But there were no deep grooves, no signs of all that friction. And maybe the biggest nail in the coffin, there's zero evidence of a huge camp needed to house the thousands of workers it would have taken. So to settle it once and for all, modern scientists decided, okay, let's just try it ourselves. They built replicas, they used the same kinds of materials, they tried to do it just like they thought the ancients did to see if brute force was really the key. And the result? Well, you can probably guess. It was a complete failure. Every single time, the ropes would snap, the logs would get crushed. They just couldn't make it work. The simple answer was just plain wrong. So that just blows the whole thing wide open, doesn't it? If it wasn't brute force, if it wasn't just raw muscle power, then what in the world was it? And this is where things get really, really cool. It brings us to a breakthrough in understanding, to the real secret, the walking stones. See, the solution wasn't about muscle at all. It was about brains. They figured out this incredible technique we now call walking. Instead of trying to drag this monster, they made it walk, using these small, super-controlled movements. So how does an 80-ton stone walk? It's actually genius in its simplicity. Teams with levers would rock the giant block so it was teetering on one edge. With that corner up in the air, another team would pivot it forward, just a tiny bit. Then they'd rock it back the other way, onto the opposite edge, and pivot that corner forward. You do that over and over and over again. Rock, pivot, and slowly but surely, this massive stone literally walks across the landscape. And this is why it was such a game changer. It almost completely eliminated the friction problem that made dragging it impossible. It meant they needed way fewer people, and because the movements were so small and controlled, it was so much safer. It was the absolute definition of working smarter, not harder. And you gotta understand, this wasn't some lucky guess or a clever little trick they just happened to discover. This showed a deep, deep knowledge of physics, of leverage and the center of gravity. It showed they could handle complex logistics, coordinating huge teams of people in perfect harmony. They knew exactly what they were doing. Okay, so we've cracked the how, but honestly, that just leads to an even bigger question. Why? Why go to all that trouble? Well, it turns out the whole thing was a message sent across time. And this is the part that gets overlooked, but it's the most important piece of the puzzle. This wasn't about building something practical. The move itself, that was the point. The entire incredible feat was symbolic. It was a giant 80-ton billboard declaring their power. By doing this, they were showing everyone, we control nature. We can bend the laws of physics. They were showing we control people by commanding hundreds in perfect unity. And by creating something so permanent, they were showing their control over time itself.
Think about the statement they were making. It's like they were screaming across the centuries. Look what we can do. We can command armies. We can make the very earth obey our will. We are masters of the physical world. And you will never forget us.
And you know what the crazy part is? It worked. It absolutely worked. I mean, here we are, thousands of years later, talking about them, baffled by what they did, marveling at their genius. Their message was delivered, loud and clear. So this all begs a pretty big question. What does this ancient story tell us about ourselves right now? It kind of holds up a mirror to our own time, forcing us to think about what progress even means. Think about this contrast for a second. For them, power was permanence. It was what you could build out of rock that would last forever. But for us, so much of our modern world, our knowledge, our power, it's all digital. It exists on fragile servers that could be wiped out in an instant. That stone stands as proof of a really uncomfortable truth, one we don't like to think about. Progress isn't a guarantee. It isn't a straight line up. And just because we have smartphones and supercomputers doesn't automatically make us smarter than the people who came before us. And that leaves us with a final thought, a pretty sobering one, actually. When all of our digital information is gone, when the servers finally go dark, what will we leave behind? What's going to be our 80-ton stone?